All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this first webinar organized by the Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management. This webinar is part of the Ethics Month activities. And my name is Chiara Valentini. I'm Professor of Corporate Communication at Jyväskylä University School of Business and Economics in Finland. And today I will act both as a chair and also as a presenter in this webinar. With me, we have Jason Miklin, Senior Researcher at the Center for Development and Environment, University of Oslo in Norway. And then we have also Rickard Kampi from CMI Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation, also based in Finland. Now, this webinar very much focus on conflicts and crises. So we try in a time frame of an hour to share with you some insight based from our own research and field experience of the intricate dynamics that organizations these days are facing. As you know, we are living very much complex time with a lot of conflicts, with a lot of complexity. And I will start sharing some data on stakeholder perception, particularly on the Finnish population, perceptions of the role organization during a very concrete and, at least for Finnish perspective, very close conflict, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And then I will pass the word to Jason, who has also a lot of experience in peace building and conflict mitigation, and he will share with you insight on what organization can do in this regards. And then we finally move into Rika's presentation, where she will share her experience on peace mediation from a non-profit perspective. This webinar is recorded, so will be made available later on to all of you and others, hopefully, who might find interested in what we are sharing. And we will go through the presentation, all of them, and then take the question at the very end. Please use the QA function in the Zoom to post your question, and we will address at the very end. And with this, I guess I will stop here, change my hat into the presenter hat, and move into my own presentation. Okay, I'm having a little bit, yes, here comes. So what I would like to share with you is some very much preliminary data that I have collected together with two colleagues, Juha Munukka from my same university and Hui Sao from the University of Lund in Sweden, on this very recent conflict, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Now, we became very much interested in conflicts and crises, as we have seen, and I'm pretty sure many of you have seen, an increasing expectation by stakeholders towards organizations, particular businesses, to take new roles, not just the usual CSR roles, but even more important and also more challenging roles like mediating during conflicts and peacekeeping situations. So we were very much interested to explore whether the typology of action that an organization, particular business, could undertake in conflict situation. And here I'm referring not to internal conflicts like organizational conflicts, but more geopolitical, global issue conflicts. So in these circumstances, what are the type of corporate action that stakeholders appreciate the most, and how those action produce, for instance, important outcomes for organization, for instance, in terms of their reputation, their credibility, how they perceive to be authentic, in terms of also willingness to give further support, speak positively about them, about their actions. And so we started this project, and we map out from existing literature and work very different kind of types of corporate actions that have been studied and seen in the real field. In the slides you see here, those 4 macro category of behaviors that you can also read more about from the literature. We detect some actions the organization can do in conflict situation. Of course, organization can be neutral, take a neutral stance and continue to do business as usual. So try to keep separate from what's happening in their surrounding. They could even be a bit selfish and take advantage of the situation, especially when other maybe competitors leave the market area, and so give space, opportunity for them to expand and increase their business opportunities. Or they can withdraw, decide to exit, so close their activity from the conflict area, or even more, not just withdrawing, but also engaging in actions that supporting the victim of a war or mediation, so dialogue or things like that. That's the proactive behavior. So what we did in our study, we created 4 different type of scenarios based on these 4 behavior, and trying to test whether people would, which one in the context of Russian-Ukrainian war, people would expect a corporation to do, what would be the more ethical, more moral action that a corporation should do during the war. And we collect data a bit more than 6 months ago, so last June here in Finland. It's a very representative sample because we were carefully to select the respondent based on a number of social demographic informations like gender, age, and political orientation, so forth. Now we share with you only some of the data that I think is interesting to discuss. The first I want to share with you is the concept of issue severity. So before assessing the expectation of stakeholder, we need to think about how seriously this conflict is perceived by the population. What is the level of severity in that? And here we had a number of subcategories, with the first one showing now is the relevance of the conflict. And we asked them to assess how they felt from 1, not at all, so the red column, to blue, completely gray. Here I would like just to underline 2, in my view, very important findings, that at least from this specific conflict point of view, things were ranked very high, the involvement feelings, and ranked high, so the blue column, the relevancy of this conflict. We ask also from an emotional point of view how they were feeling about the conflict, and we know that emotion play a key role in how different individuals respond to communications and behaviors, organization, and so forth. And here again, the feelings that emerge as a predominant, so look at the blue columns, are the anxiety and the worry, which are 2 negative emotions. Finally, we ask their level of interest, and also this one scored very high. So they care about the Russian-Ukraine conflict. They want to get more information about what's going on, and they hope to know more about the situation. Now, why I talk about issue severity is because this issue severity has very likely affected their perceptions of appropriateness, or what we measure satisfactions on the action that we present them. So we present 4 scenarios, where in one scenario, the business organization was taking advantage of the conflict, for instance, expanding its operation in Russia. One scenario where they withdraw the operation from the Russia market, one scenario where they stay neutral, one scenario where they withdraw and also did something for the Ukrainian refugees. This chart shows that the withdrawal and the proactive engagement received the most appreciation, so higher public satisfaction, whereas the take advantage and the neutral stance, not doing anything, had much lower public satisfaction. Moving on the ethical dimension, how were they perceived, these actions by the population? Here again, similar kind of a pattern. You can see the red columns are those who disagree, so don't think the action of the company is ethical, and the blue one that is of the opposite, very ethical. So in the situation of take advantage and business as usual, they consider the action not ethical. And the situation where they withdraw and had proactive engagement, they consider very ethical. Same pattern when we ask about to be perceived as just, and same patterns where the company action were considered to be the moral things to do. And again, with the same trend, perhaps a little bit lower, but still the sum of the blue is 2/3 of the population that would agree that withdrawing and proactive engagement is the moral things for corporation these days. Now, moving on, we want to measure some of the parameters that perhaps corporate communication professionals are keen to look at. Would this action be perceived as authentic or just fake stuff? And we had a battery of different kind of adjectives you can see here in the slides. They were proposed in dichotomous scale. So from one side, the lower numbers indicate low authenticity, and on the higher scale, high authenticity. And here I put circles on the scores that are more interesting. So in the situation where the corporation was withdrawing from the market, they felt it was more sincere, so more authentic, more undisguised, more legitimate action. And so also for the proactive engagement, and reverse when they were taking advantage of neutral stance. We ask about the effects on corporate goodwill, whether their perception have changed based on the action that this organization here. This chart shows the take advantage behavior. As you can see, the red stand above everything. Here we ask very much a question like, do you think the company cares about its community? Do you think the company has the interest of the conflict victims at heart? Is it self-centered? Is concerned with the conflict? Is sensitive to the conflict victims? Does it understand the conflict situation? So the red column says not at all. In the neutral position, lower scale, but still a lot of red and orange. So they also think that when the companies don't do anything, stay neutral, they don't really show this parameter, they don't show this. And here again, positive side, when they withdraw, they have higher they perceive the corporate goodwill much higher because of the blue scores indicates that they feel the company cares about the community and so forth. And I'm showing just a moment the other slide that's similar as the previous one with high blue and low red. A final point that I want to share with you today, we also measure a battery of different kind of behavioral intention responses. The ones I'm showing here are the responses relating to their willingness to talk to other people, to their friends, to their community, to online via internet, social media, or other means, positively or negatively about what they heard the company was doing in this current conflict. Again, here I underline that when the organization take advantage, they should expect more negative engagement, more negative word of mouth, less support, and also more oppositions. And surprise, surprise, even when they do the business usual, when they stand neutral in conflict, they can expect more negative, although not as much as they take advantage, but still some negative engagement by their stakeholders. To conclude, my main takeaways for this webinar is, first of all, the higher the issue severity is, the higher stakeholder expectation for positive conflict mitigation action are. And this is something that is very important to understand the expectations of stakeholder on the specific issue. So the issue severity is a central component to decide what to do, when to do, and how to do it. Neutrality, unfortunately, in our case, with high issue severity, doesn't help organization. On the contrary, try to be neutral, bipartisan, might still create some negative behavior and definitely doesn't meet the stakeholder expectation. And what our preliminary finding shows is that when stakeholders are satisfied with the corporate actions, there is a clear indication that the perception of authenticity, morality, responsibility, and also the willingness to support the organization all increase as a result of this engagement with the conflict. And I think I will stop here and leave the floor to Jason to share a bit more about his experience with what corporations are doing, and then we move to Rika. Jason, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chiara and Mateus. I'm sure my PowerPoint will come up there soon. Great. Yes, so my name is Jason Meiklin. I'm based at the University of Oslo, and I'll talk today about a bit of a synthesis of a decade of my research and those of others in teams I've worked with that have really tried to bridge the peace-building political science and the business and management spaces, looking specifically at what companies do in crisis and conflict settings, what helps them succeed, where they fail, and more broadly, how their relationships with local communities can help to either predetermine or create the likelihood for success to be a bit greater. So yeah, great, thanks. So, you know, we all see that there are these major macro changes happening in the world. This can be climate change, globalization, increasing inequality. Together, both separately and together, they're building this almost unprecedented uncertainty for business strategy. So for our team, it really raised the question, how can we academics help deliver better and more actionable real-world guidance for firms? So it started from work that we had done in the peace and conflict space, and really recognizing that some companies have perfected ways to manage the sort of uncertainty that crisis and conflict can bring. And they do this in some of the most volatile places on Earth. So we wanted to learn why some firms thrived under crisis while others failed. We've probably interviewed about 300 or 400 businesses. We've held lots of discussions with practitioners, policymakers over the past decade to really try and learn what works under crisis and why under a broad range of political and social conflict settings. Now, a lot of what I'll be talking about today is there's academic articles for specific components of this, but I'm trying to stay as broad as possible just to give an interpretation of the space. Next, please. Great. So when we talked with successful firms, they really started coming back to three strategies that they employed. And sometimes they even found these strategies by accident. But the three were, you know, elevating community relationships to true partnerships, not relying on laws or the government alone for guidance on what to do, and making principled political choices. So for smart firms, preparing for crisis meant not only calculating strategic risks and being more efficient, but also building what is called a social license to operate. So we'll take each of these three insights in turn. And the first, and perhaps the most obvious, especially for this group, is to make the community a partner in any socio-political strategies that you have. In our research, we saw that companies who viewed local communities as merely sources of consumers or staff or raw materials tended to suffer when crisis hit. And these types of companies would cut ties with their communities by taking cost-saving measures right at the time when they should be doing the opposite. But shutting out the local community, it actually multiplied their risk of failure because they put themselves on an island, and then they would close factories or company offices or have to close the company itself. But the firms that succeeded realized that being a partner means more than just doing philanthropy or some sort of surface level CSR. You actually need to create a joint stake in success. And there's lots of different ways to do this, of course, but there's no one size fits all. It's more the method of the partnership and creating that true engagement with the local community is what generated a buffer for companies in times of crisis. Now, the second insight is that companies have to work not just with government, but also beyond government agencies. There's a very common mistake that we saw firms making is that they partnered with local officials as if they were the community. But unfortunately, when public institutions are inadequate or are even the groups that are thwarting development and progress in a region, it can be a disastrous approach. The picture here is from research that we did in Odisha, India, under a proposed project by Korean mining company POSCO. So they spent about 5 years trying to follow local laws and rules, but they wouldn't talk to the local community upon guidance from the local government. So this led to a situation where the company did everything right in terms of best practice, but they still lost $1 billion by misreading the local environment and trusting corrupt local officials to handle problems instead of working with the community themselves. They ended up having to sell off their project for pennies on the dollar to domestic competitors. But working beyond the government allows businesses not only to have better community relations, but the community itself can serve as a warning beacon. And the third big insight that we have is perhaps the most counterintuitive, which is that companies succeed in crisis by making principled political choices, even when parts of the population disagree with them. And this really gets to also what Chiara was talking about in terms of authenticity and the inability to stay neutral through very complex crises and expect that no one will notice. So we found that those that took a clear stand in line with their values were the ones that won widespread community support. The picture here is of CEO Hamdi Ulukaya at Chobani. So about 10 years ago, Chobani was a $2-3 billion company, and they built it in part by prioritizing disadvantage and including progressive politics in their business. But when Donald Trump became president in the United States, Chobani started getting attacked for those very activities that we would consider progressive. But instead of shrinking or backing off, he actually doubled down and had more explicit pro-refugee policies and really started to show that their values were not, they weren't surface level. They were actually deep and embedded in the company. So these choices actually tripled the company's the growth, and the company's now one of America's most respected firms. So these strategies, of course, overlap, and successful companies often do all three, and together they make up what many call a social license to operate. So communities give this license by means of a trade. They provide jobs, development, they follow local customs, in exchange, they make a profit. The picture here is of a mining district in India in a conflict setting where by listening to communities and supporting them as partners, the Tata company has actually been able to succeed through situations of conflict and deep insecurity where other companies like POSCO failed. Now, of course, not all members of the community share the same values, so being upfront about this can risk alienating people the business depends on. And this really reflects a key lesson of our research in crisis settings more generally, which is that successful firms learn what the community needs and what the community feels secure and integrates that into their operations. So the firms that built these sorts of alliances with their community were much more likely to survive and thrive through crisis and also grow more rapidly afterwards. Now we can place these activities in a bigger global context, which is the business and peace philosophy. And this started with a question of what does ethical business look like in fragile and conflict-affected spaces? And could ethical businesses actually even grow peace in those areas? So, since the 1990s, in 2000s especially, we have moved at multilateral institutions like the UN, World Bank, etc., from seeing business as either an actor that shouldn't be involved in peace and conflict or as part of the problem. But over the last decade, especially, the UN in particular has seen businesses that the businesses need to be a part of the solution. So the quote here is from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, saying that companies actually must be a driving force to push governments to assume societal responsibilities. And if they do human rights and development jobs properly, businesses are indeed contributing decisively for peace. So it's a real push from the international community to say that that all the good things businesses are saying in annual reports, in ESG reports, if they want to operationalize these things, we are here to be your partner. And we can see this philosophy growing globally, with some $17 trillion directed to be SDG compliant, and most of the world's 500 largest companies support these sorts of precepts today. So what actually works when you try and do these partnerships? Our research brought out a few common ways that businesses can actually succeed in these partnership relationships in hard places. The first is to recognize that companies can't do everything, but they do have unique abilities and skills that can help build local development if they're leveraged. A lot of this has to do with the ability of firms to work through difficult financial situations, have long-term visions, and perhaps have alternate understandings of risk and security than government officials do. Second is that a greater degree of local investment can make peace and development ventures more likely to succeed. When you have a major vested interest in a community and it's reciprocated, these sorts of things can build local stability in fragile situations. Third is that actually partnering with NGOs or government or international organizations has unique advantages. The few really major success cases that we have researched have been when a business works with an NGO or a development agency where everyone can each do their own expertise. Fourth is that previous long-term community relationships matter. Companies tend to have longer time horizons, but they also don't look at the past enough. And companies realize that smart companies realize that the sort of relationships where you want the community to trust you aren't ones that you can build over a month or 3 months. You have to have a decade of experience in the community showing that you care. And the fifth is that development initiatives can actually lead to peace, especially when businesses consider community integration. And those sorts of activities can help build peace over the long term. So now, as we all know, the world has seen this dramatic spike in fragility, conflict, and violence over the last 10 years. And this is wrapped within global crises like COVID-19 and the climate crisis. But what our research in crisis zones has shown that in the places where this really matters, there's no one magic bullet or guidance that a company can follow. It's really whatever definition or activity you pick, you need to be clear about it. You need to articulate it authentically and actually apply it and not just give lip service, because it is so much easier for people to see through artificial attempts now than in the past, and they will be recognized and you'll actually be punished for them as a company. So taken together, from the scholarship side, we really want business and crisis work to take the discussion forward in a few key ways. So of course, we're aiming to bring peace and peace-building scholars into the business management, business ethics, communication spaces so that we can share research for joint insights. Typically, we know a lot about peace and conflict, but we don't, collectively as peace and conflict scholars, we don't know a lot about how companies work, what's important to them, and perhaps most importantly, the language that companies and management scholars use in order to articulate some of these same ideas. And following along with that, we really hope that this can expand theory and practice on business-society relationships. Especially beyond a lot of the examples that we see today, which are mostly on extractive companies. And third, we really want to deliver new empirical material for the next generation of business contributions to society, especially now that it's being driven by a younger generation of managers that are raised in the belief that being a positive actor as a business isn't an option anymore. It's a prerequisite for operation, especially in crisis settings. So I really like to end on this image of a businessman in Iraq, because it shows that, in many of the hardest crisis settings, the vast majority of companies that are working there don't have a choice. They have to push through. They can't leave or shutter operations. They have to work through crisis, and they have to figure out a way to do it if they're going to survive. Now, the good news is we found that companies that employed these sorts of lessons also made more positive contributions to the communities. It's always a cliche to say that something's win-win, but really, like, the companies that were more community engaged were more profitable, and vice versa. So we all know that business can help or harm society through the decisions it takes. But we're getting into that space right now where we actually now have more empirical evidence on what works and what doesn't through crisis. So by following these sorts of principles, businesses operating in these spaces can make more resilient communities, and they can deliver more profits if they harness their unique influence in these spaces. And that is it for me. So I'll say thank you and hand the baton off.
Thank you, Jason. Before we move to Rika, just a practical information, because I just heard that our QA function is not working correctly. So what we're gonna do is that after Rika presentation, use the raise hand option, and we will make sure the microphone will open so you can ask directly your question to us. Okay, Rika, so I will give you the floor for your presentation, and we'll see what questions are coming from the floor.
Thank you very much, and it's been very interesting to hear you, Chiara and Jason, talk. My name is Riikka Kämppi. As you heard, I'm Senior Advisor on Public Relations at CMI Martti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation for the past 2 years. And I'm going to go through some more concrete examples from a period of about 30 years working mostly in the humanitarian sector, but just wanted to introduce you to CMI a little bit before I go on to the examples. Yes, please, the next, yeah, thank you. Wanted to share with you our vision, which is that all conflicts can be resolved. This is something that our founder, President Martti Ahtisaari, said in his Nobel lecture in Oslo in December 2008. And what he also said there was that wars and conflicts are not inevitable. They are caused by human beings. There are always interests that are furthered by war. Therefore, those who have power and influence can also stop them. And I think this is also a very good message for companies. Next slide, please. So my first example is something that I really truly love, this yellow box, the safety box. I think it's one of the most beautiful examples of positive contribution from the private sector in conflict situations. The box was jointly developed by a rather small Finnish company producing packing material and UNICEF. Why did they do this? It's because there's a need to vaccinate people in conflict zones, but you tend to create new problems because of the dirty needles in situations where there's no proper waste management. So this box solves the issue as there's very flammable material on the bottom of the box, so you can safely dispose the box when it's full of needles by burning it in a very efficient way. So whenever I see this box, like in this picture from the Guardian newspaper, my heart is filled with joy, because I think it's such a simple little thing that's actually really helping people in conflict zones. Next slide, please. Also, a very nice example, I think, is what Nike did a couple of years ago in 2020, to be exact. The CEO, the president and the CEO, John Donahue, spoke to all Nike employees in May 2020. He said, "I've been asking myself how to respond during times like these, both as a citizen and as a member of the Nike family." He said, "Let me be as clear as I can. Nike is opposed to bigotry. We are opposed to hatred and inequality in all its forms, indirect and overt. While Nike cannot solve injustice, I believe we have a responsibility to work towards addressing it to the best of our ability. What we can do is inspire and empower ourselves and others to action, and try to help shape a better society by serving as a beacon of hope and resilience." And the consumers really supported this message. Next year, 2021, Nike shoe sale sales were really taking off. So I think up until that moment, 2020, quite often during my career, companies, the bigger, the more often would say that they don't want to be involved in politics. And conflicts are often considered political. So Nike became really political here, but it paid off. And I think therefore it's a very positive example. Next slide, please. Another good example, I think, was what McDonald's and Burger King did together to celebrate and support Pride a couple of years ago. So they joined forces to create joint commercials, and this was extremely well received by the consumers, as it was considered a very genuine and warm gesture. So ever since this happened, I've been trying to encourage companies to make a stand on a conflict issue by joining forces. Next, please. Going on to a little bit more problematic examples. So what you see here are Legos. And Citizen Brick is a store in Chicago that designs custom Lego pieces. On the right-hand side, you see a Molotov cocktail for 10 euros. And on the left-hand side, President Zelensky minifigure for 100 euros. Next slide, please. What they said was that 100% of the sale will, just checking, I'm stuck here. Yeah, 100% of the sale of these items will go to direct relief to assist with their efforts to bring medical supplies to the people of Ukraine. So a very noble cause they were doing this for. Direct Relief is a charity that provides humanitarian and disaster relief to countries around the world. And in Ukraine, they partnered with the Ministry of Health in Kiev to get medical supplies to Ukraine and to the surrounding countries. And according to Citizen Brick, they raised over $16,000, almost $17,000 through the sales of these miniature Legos. And I admire this. I think it's a very clever idea, and they're doing a fantastic job. But I was quite shocked to see a Molotov cocktail Lego piece, not only thinking how when they're spread on the floor, you will step on them, it will hurt you, but for the simple, I think the simple is very strong and quite controversial. And I feel that in this digital world we are living now, we are expected to take a stand very quickly and very loudly, whether we are representatives of companies or communities, not to mention politics, of course. But I would encourage you to exercise restraint and consideration when it comes to bodies or weapons or other war propaganda, because your choices, your communication choices will have a long echo even for the decades to come, and especially in a war situation, because if you play around with the idea of an enemy, one day there will be the point where you have to negotiate with the enemy to actually build peace, because peace is made with the enemies, not with your allies. So therefore, I think we should take a step back and think thoroughly before we actually do something. Next slide, please. Another very problematic example from my early career from the 90s. I was working with the Ogoni people living in the Nigerian Delta. And the husbands of Esther, Victoria, Blessing, and Charity were hanged in 1995. And 5 other men, including the protest leader and writer Ken Saro-Wiwa, were also executed after what the human rights group Amnesty International described as a flawed mock trial, so it was not considered a proper trial. And together, these activists became known as the Ogoni Nine. Their deaths followed a brutal crackdown by the Nigerian government on peaceful demonstrations by the Ogoni people. And I think this Jason referred to this kind of events, whether you should only work with the government or also with the local people. Can you trust the government to be in all situations your best partner? So this was clearly an example of such. The Ogoni people were frustrated by the destruction of land vital to their livelihoods. Shell always denied any wrongdoing, and what I was trying to do was to build some kind of a bridge between the Ogoni people and the company Shell. We were trying to arrange some dialogues, but we were not successful, unfortunately. But this has come with the price to Shell, because in 2009 settlement, they paid over 50 million to one group of activists' families, including the Saraviva estate in United States. But again, they denied any responsibility, but they just agreed to pay. And this is one of the series of environmental lawsuits brought against them. And also a couple of years ago in 21, after a 13-year legal battle in the same Dutch court, they ordered Shell to compensate Nigerian farmers for spills that contaminated their farmland and fishing waters in the Nigerian Delta. The company had to agree to pay more than $100 million. And there's one more case still ongoing. So there are really severe consequences. Next slide, please. As my last example, I want to show you something that we, CMI, did just one year ago. We wanted to speak to decision makers in companies, but also to the general public of the fact that there are more conflicts at the moment than there has been since the Second World War. And also we wanted to remind people that nobody leaves their home unless they are forced to do so. So there's this event in Helsinki called the Nordic Business Forum with 7,000 participants. And as they were sitting in the opening ceremony, they heard this message. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to focus on something that I believe is an important issue for every person in this room. Everyone, please look under your seat. Is there something taped under it? An envelope, maybe? Now, all of those who found an envelope, please open it. In those envelopes, you will find a key. Each of these keys represents a real house key of a person who had to flee their home due to a war. Now think about your own keys. They are the one thing that's always with us, no matter where we go. And yet it's the first thing that a person running away from a crisis no longer needs. Now, if all of you with the keys, would you please stand up? We're going to do a small visualizing exercise. You're not that many, are you? About 100 people. You represent refugees who make it back home after being forced to flee. Most of you have done so due to a conflict. But here's the thing, the rest of the room, 6,900 people to be exact, represent refugees who never make it back. Think about that. If everyone in this room had to leave their home because of a war, only these 100 people holding keys are likely to make it back. Right now, we live in a world where over 100 million people are running from conflict and human rights violations, and only a handful of them get to open the door to their home again. And in the exhibition you see here, we presented 10 real life stories behind the keys at this event, Nordic Business Forum. And after that, we went on a tour to shopping malls, book fairs, and even in a church. Next slide, please. But to reach the wider general public, we also created these apartment ads. An apartment in Kiev or a house in Kabul would cost 28 million, we said, which is the price of warfare in just 1 minute. These ads were shared in social media very widely, and as a result, almost 160,000 people viewed the ads, making them the most popular ads on this apartment sale site. Also, their customer support received record high number of contacts as 700 people called or emailed them. And in Finland, the ads were covered in all major news. And it was very cost-effective campaign as these ads cost less than 160 euro. Next slide, please. As it also became international news, so we really managed to get the message widely across with the cost of 160 euros, because we've had a wonderful marketing agency partner, TWBA, who created this fantastic idea. So I hope this is some encouragement, perhaps a few words of warning or where you should be cautious, but I hope this was also some encouragement for anybody in the audience who is working in a company to do something like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rika. So now we can move to the discussion. As I mentioned before, the chat or QA function seems not to work. So feel free to raise your hands if you like to ask questions, and then we can open the microphone. Maybe for starting, I have right away a question for Rika. I think I've been so emotionally touched by your presentation with the key metaphor and how much conflicts cost in terms of from economic, but also especially human side. And I think you also highlight your presentation the importance of partnering, which also we have heard in the presentation of Jason. Maybe Jason, then you can jump in also in this discussion. And when I think about, best practices and how to approach that, I was wondering if you could share or elaborate more how, for instance, businesses could maybe with little experience who would like to engage in this partnering, these activities, how should they approach, should they start these kind of activities? Would you like to share something from your own experience?
Well, I think in most cases, it's me with my colleagues calling the companies. Could we have a meeting? Could we have a chat? We have a fantastic proposal for you. And it's rather rare that a company would approach a humanitarian actor. But luckily, there are some events where it becomes like more naturally that you, perhaps on a break in a seminar, you speak and you start to find some common ideas and build on that.
Thank you, Rika. Jason, would you like to add something? I saw you nodding the head.
Yeah, no, I also have that experience as well. Like, it's not every firm that is willing to do this sort of stuff. And I think it comes with the reflection that, for a lot of firms and for organizations in general, this stuff is pretty scary. There's a lot at stake. And asking a company without expertise to be some sort of leader in local peace and development not only is something that a lot of them consider outside their mandate, they just don't want to mess it up. It's not that they don't care. It's like we don't know what to do. So taking that first step sometimes can be quite challenging, but very, very rewarding. And the only other thing I'll add to that from what you were saying and from what the other things too is we, of course, have so many new guidance documents coming in from so many different places. We have the EU taxonomy, human rights due diligence frameworks, business and human rights. Here in Norway, we have the Norwegian Transparency Act. We have everything with ESG reporting. And all of those guidance documents in some way are welcome, but I would like to remind that those, for issues like this, those are really the starting point, not the finish line. Those are the sorts of things that can help you understand what sorts of things generally work. But it's that community partnership that you need to undertake as a company to understand what is really going to work in your local context. And that's what very often makes the difference in what succeeds. It's not the what you do, it's how you do it, and how you pick what it is that you end up doing.
Rika, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if you're campaigning around a conflict, it's a very difficult communication situation because there are strong emotions attached to a war or a conflict, and you tend to see other people as your enemies. So I would encourage companies to, in this difficult communication situation, to be sort of humble, to realize that they're not the experts of such situation, to listen to the humanitarian actors who probably have more experience working in a situation like that. To be concrete, I showed you the keys to peace. Before we launched the campaign, we did think very carefully, can we use the key as a symbol? It sort of felt like self-evident, simple, because we know for a fact that most people who flee their home because of a war, they hold on to the key, and it's a very important symbol for them. But then again, we had to think, can the simple key be interpreted in a wrong way? And it's quite a strong symbol for the Palestinian resistance. So we had to analyze whether somebody would think it as taking a stand in favor of Palestinians against Israelis, and we had to consult several partners all over the world to make sure that the key is neutral enough as a symbol to be a successful symbol in this campaign, just to give you a concrete idea.
Thank you. That's very also important to underline, because this kind of crisis might create a double crisis. So by choosing to engage maybe with a good intent, and they enter in another crisis loop, because then maybe, as you said, it could be a wrong association. I do have actually another question that's maybe this time more for Jason, but Rika, feel free to comment. You had in one of your points the fact that sometimes it's not good to start engaging with the local government, because the local government might not have the interest of the community at the core, and it's better to engage with the community. On the other hand, for international companies, the government is a key stakeholder, the gatekeeper, because they might not be able to do business in that country at all if they don't have the government support. So I was wondering if you could share something about, in this situation where obviously the government has the power to affect the business organization, but then it's not the best partner for the community. How can organization navigate this kind of scenario where on one side they should focus more to the community, but then they have on the other side, the government?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it was I simplified a tremendously complex case here, and it's in India. Those who have worked in that space recognize that it's not just local government. There's state level governments. There's national governments. So you have this web of different governmental organizations that you have to work through for a project of this scope. And POSCO is very good at the national level organizational activities, getting the permits they need for this sort of project. But when it came to the project itself, they needed a lot of land. And they needed to displace thousands of people off of that land in order to start their operations. And this is where the problem came in, because they made the choice to give money to local officials for relocation. And they didn't really follow up on it or act engaged in that process. They just kind of sent the money away and thought that the problem was solved. Now, the problem is the local officials took that money, pocketed 90% of it, and put all of these people effectively in a concentration camp and did not let them leave. So they were not allowed to speak to the press or to the media, and they were kind of penned in for years. And the local officials then took all the money that was supposed to be for their land, for their relocation, and just kept it for themselves. So what happened was the people who were displaced then reached out to a local armed group and then ignited a local conflict based around it because they had nowhere else to turn. Now, this could have gone so many different ways, but it was a kind of an insistence from the top at POSCO that the local government officials were the only people that they were going to talk to in this process. And by the time they realized their mistake, it was far too late to re-earn that trust that was, was decimated.
Thank you, Jason, for sharing this insight. We have actually a question from the audience. Would you like to open, Birgitta, the microphone so we can hear your question? Let's see if we can hear. We still cannot hear. Maybe it's not possible. Is there a way for, let's see.
Birgit, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Seems we cannot unmute her. Is there? Looks we are not able to activate it, the audio. Okay, let's see if in the meantime you're able to activate it, the audio from that hand. So one maybe last more general questions in terms of situating, now we started this webinar with having in mind that we are living very much in a moment in time with a lot of global issues and complex issues there. So from your point of view, let's say if we need to underline as a closing of this webinar, what will be the key things you would, let's say, advise or suggest to our audience to keep in mind, have in mind? What is your key message? Jason, Rick, and you start, and then I'll close with mine.
Oh, that's a hard one. I don't know what I would say. I think that one of the things that we saw is no matter the setting, no matter how polarized things got, companies that weren't afraid to not only be authentic but act upon that authenticity tended to have much more success than companies that either acted inauthentically or said authentic things but didn't act upon them. Now, this is something that it's almost a cliche in the business management world to say this, but we saw that happen so many times that it's really worth repeating. Authentic action matters, and it matters more than almost anything else you can do, even if people disagree with you.
Thank you, Jason. Rika.
First of all, I fully agree with Jason, and perhaps what I would like to add to that is that I encourage people working in companies to proactively get to know humanitarian actors, because we might be sometimes shy to call the companies. So I really would love to see them contact us more proactively. Because at least for me, these have been really very interesting and very rewarding. You learn a lot when you do cooperation with, especially if you work together with the best companies. So it's a win-win situation, I would say.
Thank you, Rika. I guess from my side, the main takeaway will be related to the active listening of stakeholders and their expectation, which comes really for a deep understanding of what really matters for them, and situate that decisions, whether to act and how to act, also aligning with the values. I think some of the example Rika shows that some organizations are able to live the values, their corporate values, and that's why they look more authentic. So not shy away of problem, conflict, but take a stance aligning with how you and your organizations are situated in the conflict, but also in the value-based chain of decision making. Okay, I think we are just over 1 minute over time, so I'm going to close this webinar. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Sorry, this discussion didn't operate, but I'm sure there will be occasions to exchange ideas and answer your questions through the Global Alliance site. We'll publish these and we'll share a bit more insight on from our presentation. Short reminder, there will be 2 upcoming webinars for the Ethics Month, one on the 22nd of February and one on the 29th. So stay tuned with this Global Alliance Ethics Month activities. And from my side, all the best for the rest of the week. Bye.